Yeah, it's right.
More I like watching the car shows. Where they restore some cars or the auction. I've seen some. My son went there when.
They don't have one money.
Yeah, selection.
Yeah.
Thirties and forties.
Stuff on YouTube.
Oh,
yes, that's-
But
Like,
you know.
have you heard of the?
We had to mention it.
All of those guys went roadkill. Have their own channels on YouTube. So you can.
Maybe she thought it was gonna be good help.
Roadkill, they make you pay for more than.
Monday.
Oh, Mondays, yeah.
First. Every.
I don't think we'll be using it tonight.
Someone was here, she got up and ran.
I don't know. We're gonna test it out.
Sat there for about 5 minutes. Got up and walked back out.
What the buzz sounds like.
All right, let's bring this meeting to order.
Here.
Today is Thursday, February 2nd, 2023, 5:30 PM. This is the meeting of the City of Harvard Springs Planning Commission. It's a special meeting. And we start with a roll call. Jeff, would you please do that?
Rick Tarczynski.
Here.
Vanessa Warren.
Here.
Emily Dubay.
Here.
Bob Thoma.
Here.
George Pete is absent. Bill Mulder.
Here.
Mark Bidet is absent. Barry Lustgarten.
Here.
Nancy Rondell.
Here.
And we have a quorum.
Great. All right, thank you, Jeff. Next thing shown on the agenda is approval of minutes, but since this is a special meeting, we don't have minutes yet from the last regular meeting. So we'll skip that. And now we move on to public comment and correspondence. This is the part where members of the public can tell us what's on their mind and be things that are not on the agenda for tonight. And so a member of the public has 3 minutes to tell us about that. And they introduce themselves and where they live and tell us what's on their mind. So would anyone like to make a comment? Anyone on Zoom? Because there's actually no one in the room at present, other than the folks at the table here. All right.
It's kind of a snotty day. I can see
Yes,
why.
it is a bad day. Thank you for everyone for coming out tonight in the blizzard. All right, well, let's move on to new and old business. And the only thing on the agenda tonight for that is zoning code review. And we're, because it's a special meeting, this is our kind of off cycle, one that we have devoted only to the zoning code because we've been so busy with other regular business that are regularly scheduled meetings. And just to remind everybody what we're doing, the reason why we're considering changes to the zoning code is because we completed the process of updating our master plan for the city. And always we've known that what follows from updating the master plan is to make sure that the zoning code is up to date and aligns with the new master plan. So just to set the stage, that's again what we're about and why we're doing it and why we're doing it now. Right, great. And John provided us with some detailed updates to the land use grid that he's proposed. But I wanted to step back for a minute and talk about a different approach and get the planning commission members assent or dissent or modification to a way that we could go from here. So we've been slugging it out in the trenches with the details of the land use thing. It's already looks like it's being simplified. It's already being clarified. I think there's some good progress there. But my sense is that things might have changed on Saturday at the session that John put on for us, the training session on trends in zoning. And let's see who attended that.
I did.
I did. Okay, Barry wasn't there.
I was out of town, yeah.
Good. All right. So we have some context for that. So what I picked up is that the mood in the room was that these were some very promising concepts that John presented, some of the new concepts in zoning, and but they're impactful and they would take more learning and more study to really understand them and how they could potentially fit in for Harbor Springs. And so I have an idea about how we might want to proceed if you all say that they are worth pursuing. And that is, maybe we ask John to come in with 2 or 3 topics at our next meeting for the zoning code. And he could take us on a deeper dive about what these are. For instance, the first one on the list was condense the number of zoning districts. And my thought is people in the room thought that that was a worthwhile thing, to way of simplifying and streamlining, and it bore more examination. So with that as an example, would you like John to come in and give us more information about that? Let us talk about it together and how it would apply to Harbor Springs. Maybe John gives us an example of how he sees the zoning codes could be condensed on that topic.
So like how to implement the zoning diet at Harbor Springs.
For instance, yeah.
I had a question about the meeting. I know they call it trends, and I thought there were a lot of interesting ideas. I personally take the term trends not as a negative, but I consider them kind of short-term little blips of time of what's in, whether this is the trending music or fashion or the book that everybody's reading. So I was curious how trends translate into zoning, where I feel like you'd want to keep them for longer term. And just because it's trendy, maybe in Novi or some of the other cities, is that what we want here? I was curious.
Well, I wanted to, when we had the presentation, was to give you an idea of what has been occurring in zoning for the last 3 to 5 years in the way of changes. Okay. So I refer to them as trends, but I think that the way that these are going, they're not going to be trends. I think they're going to be institutionalized in terms of best practices eventually. And that's really what's happening.
Okay.
I didn't want to call the presentation best practices because some of these are not tested yet.
Right.
So and some of them I kind of gave you a pretty good spectrum of some things that are going on out there. Some which I think are not applicable to Harbor Springs, and some which I think, you should consider.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So I felt I wasn't in a position to consider any of them yet because, they're complicated subjects and they would require more study and more. Sense for us to go into the weeds on land use, district by district in our existing structure. Maybe there's a better way to look at it. So does anyone have any thoughts about, should we go into a learning mode here over the next few months?
I agree with you. Is anybody pushing us to do this in a time frame? There's your answer. Yeah, that's what I think anyway. That's my take. Yeah, absolutely. Learn more, do better.
Go deeper.
Yeah,
All right. Nancy, what do
you
you?
may learn nothing,
Yeah,
but you may learn that you
Yeah.
learn nothing.
You learn that something doesn't fit for us.
Yeah, no, I think John's on the right track and will help steer us in a usable direction.
Nancy, what do you think?
I think it's a good idea. I feel, I was looking at this and thinking after Saturday in particular, why am I looking at all these different R1 zones? A, B, C, D, all of them. And what are the differences? I was trying to pick out differences. But if we're going to consolidate them, we're really kind of spinning our wheels with this. So I'm completely in favor of picking what topics that either the commission or you together feel would be appropriate to look at for Harvard. And learning more about them, we need to pay attention to what's different now so we know what we're going to collapse if we choose to do it. But I think it makes good sense to do that.
Barry, do you have any thoughts?
So I was just talking to Nancy about what happened on Saturday. Unfortunately, I missed it, but it sounded like there was some good trends that are going on, and it would be nice to kind of dig deeper on what's going on those and how they would affect with us and what we can implement. So I'm in favor. Rob said, if we're not being pushed on this, then we do have the time to kind of dig deeper and make it right and kind of do it one time. It would be kind of nice to take a step back and really go through everything.
Do you have any thoughts?
Sort of like Nancy, when I was going over all the charts, it just seemed like we're gonna be spending a lot of time doing this, but we just talked about how we can make it better. And I don't think that, all the different sections of residential, we really need to catalog like that. They're defined by the lots. We're also talking about trying to add more housing, which this would make it easier for people to divide a lot if it's big enough to put 2 houses in it or a duplex. And a little bit more mixing if we could get, duplexes in more neighborhoods with the bigger lots. It just seems like we're not going to be spinning our wheels and wasting a lot of time on this and then make changes and have to come back and redefine it.
A couple of things you mentioned, I want to learn a lot more about before I say I'm in favor or not in favor, and those are some of the big ones you mentioned. Vanessa,
I think it's a great idea.
Emily?
Yeah, I'm all about education and learning more before making decisions. So I think it would be nice to hear his ideas for, top, practices, trends to move forward. Yeah.
And all right, so it sounds like we're in agreement that that's the way to go. To go into learning mode over the next 2-3 months and really dig deep into some of these concepts.
I have a question.
Yeah.
John, is there anything that we can do to assist you in what you're going to be doing? I don't know what it could be, but
You can do some homework.
I think at the end of the day,
if you want to give us some assignments or look at this up, do that.
I think at the end of the day, what's going to happen is you guys are going to have to be the deciders on a couple of things. If we're looking at combining zoning districts, and we can use the R1 zoning districts as a great example, there are some small differences. The easy one to point out is the differences in the dimensional requirements, the minimum lot sizes and the setbacks. There are differences between those. So if we're combining those, we then have to decide what we're gonna go with for those setbacks. The other difference in some of these is uses, and that really only comes into play with some of the special land use choices, and the example there would be guest quarters. In R1, B, and C, in R2, and in guest quarters is a special land use requirement. However, in R1, A, and E, which are predominantly those are the zoning districts that are along Lake Michigan. Zoning guest quarters is a by right use of property. If they want their accessory building to go 2 stories, they do still have to come in for special land use. But if they're just building a 1-story guest quarter, they would not need to come to the planning commission. So that would be if we were, for instance, going to be combining R1, B, and C with R1, A, and E, we would need to make a decision. Is that going to be a special land use requirement for that, for both areas? Or is it going to be a by right use? Or does it make sense to keep them separate areas so it can be special in one area and by right in the other? And that's really the choice that you'll have when you start looking at combining districts, will be either the use restrictions or the dimensional restrictions.
Or both. Yeah.
Well, I think Bob asked about, can we do some homework, or is there something we could do?
Yeah, I think if the planning commission decides on 2 or 3 things that they want to focus in on, then I can put some materials together for each of those 3 topics so that you can read about them. And you know, do some of your own research. So you can kind of build your own knowledge base.
I think that's the way to go. And then I want to recommend this zoning reform toolkit from the American Planning Association. And it's dynamite. And we inquired about whether or not we could order a copy for members of the Planning Commission and some others. And Victor, what do you think about $50 a copy for at least the members of the Planning Commission?
I think for the planning commission, it's a good idea.
You think you
I don't
can
know if the council or ZBA needs it yet. But for the planning commission, I think it would be good. If, John, do you think that's a good resource?
Yeah, it has a lot of the stuff that we covered on Saturday.
Yeah, and it's got a great bunch of intro on demographics and the changing world and what the rationale is for some new ideas. And all right, so why don't we go and order up copies for the Planning Commission? And in the meantime, I do have a PDF copy, which I will get to Jeff to send out to everybody so you can preview it, but it's pretty detailed, so I found it way easier.
Well, I guess that's a question before we order, maybe get a gauge for people if they want a physical copy or a PDF copy. With a PDF.
I
Yeah,
need,
the PDF is a free download on their websites. We
I
already have. a
like a
copy.
hard copy.
Yeah.
So maybe we can send an email
Yeah.
to me or Jeff about that, then we can, Bill, then we can organize how many physical copies we can.
Great.
Also,
Is that
maybe
something you might
copies.
already have? I have something that's spiral like that. Did you give us
We-
one the last time you spoke to us?
When we were midway through the
I have something that looks like that.
When we were midway through the planning or the master plan, we ordered a couple binders. They're a little bit different. I have a couple extras in my office still. It's more just kind of general planning practices. And
Oh,
one is like about general planning and then the other one is about general zoning.
oh, that's the
And we
one that I
have,
have. Okay.
we got, I think, a copy of each of those for everybody on the planning commission, although I think some people are new since we did that, so.
So it's not the same as this one?
No.
No, it's a
Okay.
different book. It's
Okay.
still, it's about the same size. It's got good information in it. I think it's a little bit more general
Okay.
in its topics, but
Yeah, so if we knew the 3 upcoming topics, we could reference that book, we could do web searches, we could do our own research and try to get up to speed.
I think that's a good
Make it
idea,
really
Bill. You send out everyone a PDF copy and
Yeah.
then let us know if you want a physical copy.
Okay, I'll take that action item. Good. Rick, you were gonna say something else.
Yeah, well, what Jeff was saying about combining the residential districts and how some have some regulations they can do now, like guest quarters. But if we come up with a new code, the ones that are already doing it would be grandfathered in, would they not? And for everybody else, we can make it a special use. And then they just have to come before the planning commission to get approval, yes or no. And that would seems to me, simplify things a whole lot more than having two districts where they're allowed and three where they're not, except for special use. And this way, the ones that are already doing it would be grandfathered in. And from then on, anybody could do it. Just come before us with a special use plan.
I guess that's for us to decide when we get to accessory dwelling units. Which,
But it's a good point that things would be grandfathered in if you combine districts, certain uses and, yeah, so that's a good point that we just have to keep that in mind. That if we, for example, maybe ban a use in a district or prevent a use, whether it's a commercial or residential, whoever's operating as that use would still be allowed to.
That's
operate as a
not
use.
conforming now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so.
yeah. I mean, you
In
could-
fact, we have those all around town, but just something, just.
Yeah, no, well, it's good to assure people that could be nervous about.
You take it away. their use.
Yeah.
well, John, the first three things on your outline from Saturday are collapse zoning districts, character districts, and expand allowable uses. Do you feel that would be enough meat for a session or too much? Or,
For a session or
Yeah.
sessions?
I'm sorry, for our next meeting, for instance.
I can, but I think what'll happen is you probably dive into each one of those separately.
You think it'll take longer?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Want to take it down to two, a target?
No,
of
I
two?
think you identify three, then you had expand allowable uses.
Yes,
I think we can start putting the materials together for that with the understanding that it may take a couple of meetings to go through it all.
okay.
I mean, the one that I'm intrigued about is, it's not necessarily, I think you could collapse some of these districts. The one I'm more intrigued about is the character districts.
Yeah.
Because I think that's something that kind of makes Harbor Springs somewhat unique than the other communities in terms of the character of the community and so that in itself is kind of, would be an interesting topic to get into.
Yeah, I think all three are really interesting and possibly promising. Okay, sounds like we have agreement. And Jeff, do you know offhand what's on our next regular meeting agenda?
We don't have any applications, so I think, yeah, short-term rentals.
Yeah, and we were waiting for some new information from City Attorney Raymer. And if we have some information from him, I guess we could put that on the agenda, or if we don't, we could postpone it and we could go into learning mode on zoning.
Well, and I think too, the short-term rental, I've been thinking about that when we were on Saturday. And how changing some of this might also help us to answer some of the concerns or whatever about short-term rentals
Okay,
too. I mean, these things all go together, which makes it really complicated for me, but they do all go together. I mean.
Hard to
we're trying
separate them.
You really can't if you're gonna do a good job. You have to look at the big picture. If we're gonna talk about, go ahead, John.
Oh, I'm good.
We're gonna talk about uses and all of those things. Short-term rentals then falls underneath this whole umbrella. So I don't think we can solve that without dealing with some of these other things.
Based on what Bill said, and what Nancy says, my recommendation would be that if Jim Raymer has a memo, we review that memo.
Mhm.
But don't make any action and review some of these zoning concepts. Then circle back to the short-term rentals, if we feel appropriate. But I think we should probably at least have that memo, because if the memo says something different than maybe we thought it would say, then maybe we might want to act sooner, but maybe it won't say, it might say something that says, oh yeah, we can wait. But maybe there's something in that memo that says, wait, maybe we should start
You
acting.
definitely should get.
So yeah, so at least review the memo and then, I think that's a good,
yeah, do you believe we will have a memo?
I'll check with Jim. He said he would have it by.
I think so, yeah. I talked with him, after our last meeting when we discussed the need for that. And he understands that was the kind of, I didn't really give him a time frame, but just said, could you have it by? And it sounded like he would. So, but we can reach out to him to see if that's still.
So assuming that there is some memo, then maybe that's the first thing on our agenda. We read that memo, we decide what we want to do next regarding short-term rentals, and then move into zoning. zoning concepts. Okay, that sounds good. Then, do you want to wait to determine if we need another off-cycle special meeting?
Well, it sounds like we're going
Or do you want to book it?
to, I'd like to book it.
All right.
You can always cancel, right?
Right.
That's true. Do we have consensus, people? We might as well get one on the books for, I think it's
March 2nd.
March 2nd. 5:30. Okay, yep, let's get it on the books. It's great.
Well, John, will you be able to put something together for one of those topics
Yeah, for the
for the
16th.
sixteenth?
Yeah. Yeah, I can.
Okay, just make sure that we're giving.
And which
enough time.
target, will you probably go with the zoning diet one first or?
The first three,
Yeah, I'll try to.
zoning districts,
Yeah, I'll try to. go
character
through it.
districts, and expand allowable uses.
Are character districts dealt with in that spiral?
I don't believe I saw that in there.
I just need a refresher. I just need to look at the notes from Saturday.
You wanna look, go to Mount Pleasant, city of Mount Pleasant, and look up their zoning code. That's where the character
Okay.
districts are at.
Okay.
And that's where
Yeah, okay.
they achieved that middle housing that seems to be missing,
Okay,
right?
that's right.
The duplexes, the courtyard apartments, the townhomes, the bungalow courts, that's that one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, I forgot it was
interesting.
Mount Pleasant. I've got it in my notes at home. Okay.
If anybody would like a copy of the presentation
The
that we had on
handout.
Saturday, I can print out more copies of that handout.
'Cause that would be good to get to everybody who wasn't here, like Mark and George and
Might as well just put it on the website.
so we all started at least basically the same place. That would be great.
All right, well, that sounds like we have a plan. We know the dates and the times, we know the topics, at least for the next meeting, and I have one more idea for you that also came out of discussions on Saturday, and that is, we're talking about some pretty innovative concepts here, and they have implications for the community. The thought was, it might make sense to try to sync up with city council and let them know, these are some of the concepts that we're gonna look into. And here's how they relate to the master plan. They're in sync with the master plan. Here's how they dovetail with those. And we just want to give you a heads up. Are we good to go on this? Are you with us? And I would take Victor's advice about how best to do that. We talked about having some joint meetings between commissions, councils, boards, and that kind of thing. Is this the kind of thing that would require that, or is this something we could do in a presentation to council for 10 minutes or something?
You could do it in a presentation and, you could have a couple members show up from the planning commission, so there's not a quorum, and then have a presentation and do it that way. If you want a discussion between the planning commission members and the council, then I would say we would have a joint meeting. But if it's really letting council know, hey, this is what we're doing, are you guys on board with that? I really don't think that needs to be a joint meeting.
It doesn't sound like it's quite ready for
Yeah.
discussion.
I think it's more so, hey, council, like, this is our general outline of where we want to go and what we want to do. Any thoughts?
Yeah, here's what we're looking
To
into.
make the presentation and invite them to come back and think this over for a while and then get back to us.
And it won't even hurt to have, we probably will want to have a joint meeting in the future, especially because this is such a momentous task of amending the zoning code. It would be good to have periodic joint meetings.
It sounds like we would want to get farther down the road
Yeah.
before we actually get a joint meeting where we could have something big enough to discuss together.
I think if you did a presentation and it was something that council really didn't like, I mean, if somebody was like, no.
I think where you're.
But it would be
going, where you're
Nancy
going
that would
is
talk to
we
him,
don't
right?
want him to dig.
As the rep.
Yeah.
I think it'd be better if somebody from planning did a 10-minute presentation. I mean, I'm happy to talk to them, obviously, but I think it might be good if a couple planning commission folks came with it. I think,
Yeah,
We could lead. couple of us could lead it.
Yeah, I think that would be a good
Let
idea.
Nancy sit back in her council role.
So the next council meetings, there's one on Monday, obviously too soon, but February 20th and then March 6th, and then March 20th before we go on spring break. So either
That March sixth one might be good. We have a couple underneath our belt.
If you can do that.
Yeah.
Or who would you?
maybe,
who would
maybe
do
at
the
this planning commission,
presentation?
we can appoint a couple of people,
Love to do it.
maybe appoint a couple of people to represent the planning commission.
And maybe, we've done some work in, like work groups, with 2 or
Yep.
3 members. So maybe 2 or 3 of us could get together and put together a presentation and figure out how to.
A subcommittee, yeah.
All right,
I
well,
think
let's think that that's the approach we're gonna use. Let's go through our next learning session. Let's see how that goes and then we can regroup. But we'll have a soft target of March 6th for the council. Does that sound good to everybody? Okay, great. All right, any other process or ideas that we gotta talk about?
I just have a request, something I'd like to learn more about is mixed zoning, which can tie in with some of the stuff we were talking about. So I guess I'm asking John for a good reference. Where, to-
Mixed zoning,
yeah,
are you talking about like introduction of small commercial into residential
Right.
districts?
yeah. Is there a good resource for that or a good example of that?
I'll look some up for you, Nathan.
Thank you, thanks.
All right, let's add that to our wish list of topics for learning.
Oh, I have a,
Bob, that is a question.
go ahead, Bob.
Many short-term licenses have been given out.
We were just gonna have.
I was just asking Victor if I should give you guys an update on that. So I'll give you guys an update on that.
All right, February, let's close out the discussion on the zoning code then, and let's move on to.
Before we do that, then I have a quick question.
All right.
Another one of the topics that John had at his training thing last Saturday? Was the idea of varying levels of non-conforming uses. Did that sound like something that you guys liked? And the idea was like right now, our zoning code, if you're a non-conforming use, no changes to your property. You cannot expand in any way, shape, or form. And John has mentioned a couple times to me in conversation, and he presented it at the meeting, that there's an idea now where you can have, let's say, 2 different stages of non-conforming use. You could have one stage of non-conforming use that allows you to expand in no way. And the idea is that that use phases out over time and is gotten rid of. The other one would allow, if it's a use that's maybe not too horribly non-conforming, that you allow them to make some changes and modifications to the property, which would provide that property to probably stay around a little bit longer. Did anybody else feel like that fit and that we should look further into that, or?
Can you give when he gave that part of the presentation, I think it was towards the end, correct? I kind of was like, so much information, even though I was listening, it was not sticking in my head. Can you give me an example of what you just described? I can't even picture what.
You gotta look at example.
We've got a whole bunch of.
I think I can spin a yarn here, yeah, and tell me if this fits within what you're talking about, because this is new to me too. Let's say that we had a non-conforming use in town where it was a higher burning energy facility and it's in a residential district. You don't want that to continue. So the idea is you don't allow them to expand their operation in any way.
Okay,
And that eventually, from the not being able to expand, that use would die out and the property would sell and go back to residential use.
okay,
However, let's pick a use that we have in town that I think might fall into this middle category here, where it's right now it's a non-conforming use, which is the Pontius Flower Shop. Right? So right now, if she came to me and said, I want to expand my building, I need to build an addition onto the back because my business is doing well and I need 10 more feet. I would have to tell her, nope, you can't do that. However, there's this middle ground non-conforming use where you could allow some types of expansion where she maybe could expand. Or another example, she has a building behind her that I think is just a storage building. She wants to take that building down and rebuild it differently, more in line with the business use.
And that would keep her in town.
And that would keep her in town but we would have to identify where these middle uses could be and
would she have
what
to
that
come and
process would
get permission, or would she just be able to do it if you changed the?
It would depend how you,
It'd be the category. If she's in the category that allows the expansion, then she'd be able to expand as long as she doesn't exceed the dimensions or the lot coverage, which means she can just come to Jeff and have it reviewed, and he would issue. a permit.
Okay. Am I correct? I think I am, because I'm very familiar with obviously that situation. Right now in the zoning code, I believe it states that if it is non-conforming, the goal is to get rid of it. It's not phrased exactly like that, but I know when we owned Pontius, this is a lot of years ago now, we were asking to do something, and they basically said the goal is to get rid of the non-conforming uses. So I'm totally in favor of what you're talking about, because I think there are some that make the town unique. Not only Pontius, but I think there are others too, that give us some diversity and uniqueness of whether it's the way it looks or the uses of it. And I think it makes perfect sense to hang on to some of those. That's what makes Harbor so neat, is that it's not cookie cutter.
Your question, yeah, I think it might not be phrased like that, but really when you change a district to prohibit uses in there, the goal is to no longer have those uses there, so.
Right,
um,
right.
But there are, as this has been talked about, there are different uses that are of different intensity that might be more desirable in certain districts versus others. So maybe, you know what, we don't want more businesses in a certain district, but we're fine with the couple that we have.
Right.
And we're fine with them, expanding their business. In another district, you might say, like Jeff said, we don't want that tire burning facility anymore in a residential zone, so we no exceptions for them to expand. So I think that those uses is what the planning commission have to decide. We like these types of uses, non-conforming uses in these districts, but we don't want more of them. We just want to keep the number we have. We don't want to lose the ones we have, so.
What about like if the business, they want to expand and the property next door became available, are they able to purchase that and then expand to the
No.
side?
No,
Oh.
that'll be a new property.
Oh.
That would be an expansion of that use that doesn't conform with zoning, so.
Just, they can only expand on their existing property.
Oh, yeah, I'm interested in
Okay.
diving into that.
I notice it is covered in the recommended reforms from American Planning.
Yeah, that idea of having the two levels of non-conforming uses was integrated into the 2006 state statute. So the state statute allows a community to have two different levels of non-conforming uses.
Yeah, that makes good sense.
Yeah, we had talked about it a little bit, so I
Yeah.
wanted to see what your guys' thoughts are.
Great, okay, so it sounds like that's a hit in terms of a topic.
All right.
I think we would like to.
Go for one more.
I was gonna say,
So,
Okay, let's close out the zoning.
I've got one thing.
Yeah, right.
So that I don't forget this later on. There's a, grammatical error in section 3.3. Number 4, letter B. It, second line reads similar equipment required to operated and maintain. That should just be to operate. It's on page 6 of that handout.
Yeah, I got it straight. I see that. Yep, roof structures, 4B, roof structures for the housing of elevators, stairways, tanks, ventilating fans, or similar equipment required to operate instead of operated.
Hmm.
So it's just a D on the.
Yeah.
We'll make that change.
Oh, and I thought of one last thing. I wanted to say a special thanks to Michael Esposito for his work proposing definition of a marina and doing some critical thinking about those districts. And he could be a good resource when we learn about possibly collapsing districts. He might have some thoughts on WF and WF1. Well, thanks to Michael. I want to go on record to say that. All right, closing out zoning. Is that okay, everybody? All right, Jeff, over to you.
rental update.
All right.
So February 1st was our, basically kind of our cutoff date. We were holding all the licenses until that point. That was the date that anybody that previously had a short-term rental last year, they had until that date to make sure that they kept their short-term rental license. All but 5 did.
All but 5 of the single.
All but 5 in the single family when we have the restriction.
Okay.
All but 5 did. So we had 5 licenses available. or-
All but 6 did, and we had 5.
That's right,
Yeah.
that's right, thank you. All but 6 did, and we had 5 licenses of people that We're asking for a short-term rental this year that didn't have a license last year. So
We're at 60.
we're at back up to 60 of the 61 in the restricted zoning districts. We did have a couple of new ones in the areas that we're not restricting. So I think our total number is right now at roughly 92 compared to the 91 for last year.
So 61 and 31, it sounds like.
No,
60.
60.
Well,
60 and
Well,
30.
yeah, but we're allowed one more, so.
So we have one more license available for whoever happens to be the next one to bring in. They'll be the
the
lucky
complete
winner.
package.
Do we know what happened with the 5 that didn't renew? If ownership changed or anything, do we have any?
I've not looked into that.
Okay, that's great data. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
There's no conceivable way for people to buy a license and sell it, is there?
No, because right now what we've done is the license is specific to that property and that property owner. So if I have a license at my house and I sell my house to John, that license does not even transfer to John. John would have to apply for a new license. Also, I can, if I sell my house and I move 3 houses down, I cannot transfer my license from my existing house to my new house. So in either of those situations, that person would have to apply for a new license, just like anybody else looking for a new license.
Jeff, what do we do about a property that's actually an R1 but has 2 or 3 residences on it and they have a short-term rental license? Do they just have to have one license for that property since all 3 residences are at the same address?
I'm only aware of one property in town where we have that situation.
Okay,
They did have a short-term rental license for one of the units last year.
okay,
Our license does say it's for the dwelling. So in theory, if you have a duplex and you want to short-term rent both halves, you should apply for 2 short-term rental licenses. The one, I think, I don't know if you're referring to the one on State Street halfway.
Yeah, I'm referring to the one on Main Street.
Main Street. Well, if it's on the south side of Main, that's,
It's on the north side. It's an R1.
then there are no properties on the north side of Main Street that should have multiple dwelling units. That's an R1 zoning district and it should be a single family use. If they've converted it to a duplex, please let me know and I'll let them know that they're in violation of zoning.
I was just curious because I was. Okay, thanks.
When you mail, this is all theoretical, when you mail me my license or I come in to pick it up, what do I get? A piece of paper? What comes in the mail? A piece of paper?
We send you an email. I'm not sure if we, last year, we may have scanned the application and sent that. In the email, we specify and let you know of some of the requirements that you have. One of them is that you're required to make sure that your listing includes your occupancy limit. And we let the people know what their occupancy limit is. For instance, if you have a 3-bedroom home, your occupancy limit is 6. So we specify that in the email. We also include a PDF of our Be a Good Neighbor pamphlet. And we remind the property owner that they're supposed to provide a copy of that either digitally or physically to the renter when they are occupying the home. There might be some other information that's in that, but basically we do that as an email. And I believe that gets sent to the owner and the local agent.
But I guess, Bob, you're gonna, do they get an actual license that they can?
Oh, I was just curious, I was more curious.
Yeah, that's what they get. They don't actually,
Yeah.
they don't actually have a license that
Okay.
carry around. It's just an approved application, which counts as their approved license.
And that's all done for this year.
Yeah, 2020.
Pretty
Well,
much.
people can still apply for the non-residential, non-single family district. So if you live in the CBD or business or R2, you can still get short-term rentals. And we have, like Jeff said, 1 remaining for those single family districts. Yeah.
Where I'm coming from is that
Just to get on
there isn't anything that you can
the future.
email, mail, whatever, with any, your tenants should, shouldn't, can, and. That's just none of our, I'm thinking of a way to protect you as a next door neighbor to a short-term rental.
No, there are some rules.
I think we've tried to address that in our Be a Good Neighbor pamphlet. We identify and point out some of the restrictions in the city code or zoning code, I think regarding fireworks or noise or things like that. we tried to make it not too much of a, you know, us really beating it in, but more of just a polite, hey, we want to be a nice community that everybody wants to enjoy. So please be a good neighbor. I think is
I think the
the
actual
flavor of that.
ordinance wording is in the application. I thought I recall seeing that.
There is some.
There's right on the main page of the application is our definition of a local agent, so that everybody's aware of what that means. And then there's, when you actually download the application, I believe there's other pages that go with that. And one of the pages is the actual language from the city code.
Okay. We have the formal version and then the friendly version. Great, thank you. That's very interesting. Appreciate that data point.
Like a little thing that says the licensing procedure will be reviewed in the following year, and violations will be taken into accordance. There's no way to push landlords.
I mean, we have some language that states that short-term rentals it's an annual license and they need to be reapplied. And I think we have some, you know, other verbiage in the city code itself. I don't know that we have anything directly in the city code.
And it's a threat, you know.
Yeah, I mean, when we get into our, you know, the punishment section, I guess, where we talk about, you know, things that could lead to a revocation of a license and things like that. And I think it's made clear that, you know, if you have issues and if your license is revoked, there's a time period where you cannot reapply for. So we've got some stuff in there. It hasn't gotten to that point yet with any of our short-term rentals.
The last go ahead or of our new ordinance for short-term rentals, last update is when we really strengthened our enforcement procedure and cut and accelerated it. So we have now tools in place to address some of these nuisance issues much faster and much more seriously, I guess, much more. For example, one violation, we can have a suspension hearing as opposed to 2-3 letters going out. So we've definitely addressed that to address at least those concerns. So.
Any other member comments or new business?
Yes, I've got a statement here I'd like to read. Over the past year that I've been on the planning commission, we rewrote the master plan, and I'm now reworking the city codes. During these discussions and others, including short-term rentals, we focused on the character of Harbor Springs and how to protect it. In October, I broached the subject, how we might save and reuse buildings in town rather than see them be torn down and thrown into the landfill. Equally distressing is that these legacy properties are being replaced with cookie cutter buildings that could be anywhere USA and contribute nothing to Harbor Springs' sense of place. I looked into this a little bit, looking at some other historic towns around the country, Charleston, Charlevoix, Aspen, and Mackinac Island, to name a few. And they all do two things. They identify and protect historically, culturally, and architecturally significant buildings and sites, including water and trees. And two, they require that buildings slated for demolition be recycled for parts. As we know, materials from Shea Elementary, and as John mentioned at our last Saturday meeting, East Jordan Iron Works is deconstructing their entire factory to rebuild it in Elmira. In Harbor Springs, even century-old homes have high-quality elements that can be repurposed and go on to serve homeowners for years. We don't have to reinvent any wheels. Examples of preservation guidelines abound from federal level, state level, and many tiny towns. As for deconstruction, and I haven't talked to them personally, but I found the best one I found in Michigan is called Deconstruction Services in Michigan. This is a group formed by MSU through their economic development section, and it includes two of the best deconstruction companies in the country. And what they do is help small towns like ours recycle demoed buildings. Statistics show that 50% of the city's landfill is often filled with deconstruction materials and construction materials. By deconstructing and reusing, we can save 80% of that material from our landfill. My question for us today is, would we like to look into some of these ways of working and decide if it's time for us to add protective guidelines into our city goal? City code and the master plan eventually, with the goal of valuing and keeping the best of what we have, what makes Harbor Springs Harbor Springs. Now, just so happens this afternoon, I ran into a friend who's a realtor, and he didn't know I was on the planning commission. And we were talking, and he mentioned that he has recently joined the Historical Society. And because they're working on that historical corridor, but he thinks they need to go further and start setting up historical districts in town. And generally, that is where that type of work comes, is taken care of through the Historical Society. The other thing he said is that we're losing too many of the old homes in town that make Harbor Springs Harbor Springs. The best one that I can think of right now is on East Bluff. There used to be a fantastic stone house there, and it got torn down, and now we've got this monster wooden thing with its golden arches on the front sidewalk. And we just need to come up with some way to stop this from happening. My next door neighbor is a good example. He bought a house that was on Main Street, had it moved to Summit, and redid the whole house. I've been working for 8 years now on my house. And except for the sheetrock, I've recycled everything. I've torn up subfloors, used it for ceilings, used it for paneling, put down a new subfloor and put it on top because it's old pine that's just gorgeous. So I think we need to look into it, and before we lose the spirit of Harbor Springs to all these new houses, and we can help keep things out of the landfill. I think it's better for us in the long run. Now, John had mentioned that city code isn't the place for historical type of restoration and guidelines, but I think that is the job of the Historical Society. But I think the deconstruction is something that could belong in the code. And seeing as how we're working on the code right now, it's a good time to consider that as an option. Thank you.
Okay.
Rick?
So I heard a couple different things in there. One is the preservation and historic aspect. And two was a more nuts and bolts aspect about encouraging and assisting in recycling of construction materials.
Right.
Okay. Anybody have any interest in?
I think that's great. I mean, I think it's a great idea.
I love the idea.
We're building a house. I would have loved to use historical stuff to put into our house. And I'm just curious how it's obviously somebody comes in to take, where's it stored and things like that, and how do we have access to that material?
Well, see, that's what the demolition people in Michigan, they're two companies, and they come in, and when I had mentioned this before, it was mentioned that this type of thing can add 6 months to a project, and architects don't like that. But in actuality, a company like this can come in and deconstruct a house in 6 weeks. And this includes the studs, the shingles, the siding, and the insulation. They warehouse it, they sell it, or some cities require that, Aspen is one, require that you reuse it in your own house. So it can either be salvaged by individual companies and taken away, or they can take it and warehouse it and sell it. Now, when you do that, it does tend to cost a little bit more than demolition, but you can also get tax credits for it, which help compensate for that little added expense.
Sure. Oh, that's a great idea.
So it's a very wonderful project. I mean, they recycle studs and everything.
John, from our perspective here, I think there's two ways of approaching both of those. One is through regulation and one is through sort of voluntary program. And I maybe that's a discussion for later on how, what's the best way, because, creating some sort of historic district with regulations, that's very convoluted and can be a lengthy process, but having some sort of voluntary program that the planning commission is involved in might be easier to start with. But I don't know, I guess it's a talking point from your experience with this.
You usually don't embody historical review in your zoning code.
Right.
That's usually a function of a historic district, which is set up by ordinance under state statute. You can incorporate into the zoning code language that talks about compatibility of design in terms of the neighborhood. So somebody can't come in and tear down a historic home and then build something that's so modern looking that it actually degrades the context of the neighborhood. Okay, and you can incorporate some of that language into your code. You can designate areas in the community that you feel have a significant number of historic structures. And you can then apply some generalized standards to those areas relative to design compatibility, use of traditional materials, things along those lines. I know where Rick's coming from. I haven't found any up here, but I know that downstate, like in Ypsilanti, in Detroit, there's a huge warehouse in Toledo that takes up almost a city block that is nothing but filled with elements from historic homes, from everything. Sinks, toilets, doorknobs, molding, stained glass. That's all they do is they go in and buy a house. Basically, they work with the contractor that's going to tear it down. They go in and they remove everything. And then they put it in a warehouse, and people that are restoring their homes will go there and buy the material. I mean, that's where you get the historic materials.
Materials Unlimited, down
What's
at Materials Unlimited in Ypsilanti.
Materials Unlimited
Was there.
downtown FC.
When I lived down
Yeah.
there, so it was a long
They're
time
still,
ago.
they're still there. And
Yeah.
that's a good source.
And it's a great source for, I don't like to see a regulation that you have to do it. I mean, we just took stuff out of a house torn down to put in our old house, so we do that ourselves. I struggle a little with telling people that they have to do it a specific way. But something like Materials Unlimited, and there's a lot of them downstate.
And I haven't found one up here.
I don't know of
And you know,
one.
with all the older resort houses that
know.
are being torn down, that could be a business niche up here.
In
or
the
somebody-
architecture, I mean.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah, I'm amazed there isn't one
Well,
up
we
here.
do, actually, I had to tear a house down and Habitat came in and worked for 3 or 4 days and took out a whole lot of stuff and then what they didn't take out. Then and Now came over
Yeah,
and
Then
just
and
did a
Now.
fantastic job. Oh my
They'll
gosh,
do
they
some
took the
Yep.
12-foot tub from the second floor. I mean, they did a lot of stuff. And so we do have some of that going on already.
There's some,
They're
yeah.
from nonprofits. Rick, the other thought about the recycling and the nuts and bolts part of thing made me think that there's a few things that we've talked about over the past year on site plan reviews and others that, you might call them, products and processes that would benefit the environment. And this might be a process that would benefit the environment. And we talked about looking into permeable paving, for instance, instead of, specifying asphalt for parking. And I'm sure there's some others that we might want to kind of keep a scoreboard about, new products and processes that would be beneficial. So everybody keep your eyes open for that kind of stuff. If you wouldn't mind. All right. Thanks, Rick, for that research. You agreed to do that a few meetings ago and appreciate you taking it that far.
I'm gonna bounce that off some builders I know. And see what
Yeah, I've gone
what
into
happens there.
houses and tried to let them tear up floors, because there was a house in Weekly that had cherry floors. And they were in remarkable condition. They were over 100 years old. And they wouldn't let me take it. They just came in with a crane and knocked it all down and shipped it off. I mean, it was like 1,000 square feet of cherry and beadboard too. It was amazing.
Yeah.
Well, and the quality of it, so much
Right.
of the old stuff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
many.
you sound like an old person.
I know.
All right,
They own
We,
that
uh,
house.
we did the high points.
Torn
Everybody
apart.
satisfied? All right, let's wrap this meeting. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
You.